It's a good question. How did I become so addicted to books? I mean, if I had lit all the lights behind me, I'm sitting in a room the size of our living room. Every wall is full of books. Well, these two sides in the back, that way they're actually literary journals that I've been published in. Nearly 3,000. Well, not all in the same journal, of course. I got interested in books. I used to stay with my maternal grandparents in Tacoma, Sheridan Boulevard, and Grandpa John was a reader. He subscribed to the Book of the Month Club. And so did Mrs. Radford on Perkins Street, where we lived. And she belonged to the Book of the Month Club, and she would loan that book to the other ladies who liked to read, and my mother was among those ladies. So Grandpa John would take me down the hill. At the end of Sheridan Boulevard was this huge embankment with a pathway down to Pacific Avenue, a portion of Pacific Avenue that was filled with all kinds of little thrift shops and bookstores and naughty shops and things. And although Grandma didn't like him to go up and down that hill, we did. He had a walking stick he kept down there. And we'd go down, and I'd have a quarter, and for a quarter, at a used bookshop in those days, you could sometimes come home with 3 books. And the first book I ever bought of my own was Piebald, King of the Rockies. I've written a short story about it that was published some time ago. It's called Piebald, King of the Rockies. And, I just love that story. The horses can think, and you can visit their minds and think with them. And I continued that. I found Fox's bookstore in Tacoma, used books. And I would buy things that I wanted there. And then when I was in about the 6th grade, I saw an ad while I was at the barber shop in a magazine for what was called the Doubleday Dollar Book Club. And for $1, you could get something like 10 books, and your obligation was to buy so many books during the year at $1 each. Well, now these editions they were hardback, but they weren't like the printer's hardback. They were much cheaper paper and cheaper boards, cheaper everything, but it was a hardback. And it would say Book Club Edition on it, but I didn't care. I started getting copies, first of all, of some of the books that Mrs. Radford had gotten through the Book of the Month Club, some books that I'd read or partially read at least. And then I joined, shortly after that, the Reader's Digest condensed books. Because you could read a condensed version of something, get the meat of it. And by the time I graduated from high school, I read all the time. My dad had to build a couple of sets of bookshelves in my room. And then when I joined the Air Force, there isn't much to do. It wasn't until I fell in love, at least. There wasn't much to do in the evening. I didn't have a radio. I didn't have TV. And so I would read. We had a library. And I found a used bookshop downtown. And I eventually bought a record player, 33 RPM high fidelity. And at Woolworths and Cress's, you could buy was Topps brand high fidelity 33 RPM recordings of classical music for usually 99 cents each, sometimes less than that. The symphonies that weren't big time, or reproductions of music that was recorded quite some time ago. At the same time, a fresh new Columbia or RCIA high fidelity long play vinyl would cost you $3.99, even $4.95. But you could get them for 99 cents and sometimes 79 cents. They weren't as high quality, but the music was great. So I would listen to music and read. And it just continued. I've owned a bookstore, lost my shirt because they rebuilt this downtown Omaha, and a lot of us just tumbled. But until then, we did really well. I've edited several books, edited an anthology for the university, edited the Lone Willow series. Still sort of am, got to decide whether I'm passing it on. And I began to publish books. I've got now, I don't know, maybe 12, 13 thin volumes of poetry, a couple of hardbacks in that, a couple of chapbooks, a couple of regular sized, a couple of novels, a memoir of my grandmother, and a novella about angels. I got myself to the point where I could, in the service, read even a book an evening. It wasn't unusual for me to read 6 or 7 books a week. So when I got to college, where I had to work full time and maintain my house and my yard and my dogs and spent some time with my family, and I was breaking up with one lover and having a tumultuous affair with somebody else that in the end, after 5 years, wasn't really going to go anywhere. Plus going to university full-time, undergraduate school and then grad school, plus working full-time. And, you know, sometimes I'd have to read 6, 7 books a week for classes. I was an old hand at it. And then write a paper. Wasn't such an old hand at that. Oh, Lord. Can't spell. Part of that Roosevelt spelling method when I was a kid, where you would spell phonetically. He thought American should be spelled differently than English. And so some of us were taught to read and spell that way. Elephant had an F in it. Knife started with an N. Pneumonia started with an N. And they let us continue that until we got to about the 5th or 6th, or maybe it was even the 7th grade. And then they said, no, you got to learn to do it the other way. Well, mine's a mishmash of both. And, you know, it was till I was in my 60s that there was a spell check came along. Talk about a gift from heaven, at least for me. So I can't remember when I didn't like books and loved books. And I own a Kindle. I have a lot of trouble with my eyesight, and I can make Kindle big, and I can listen to it. But I still love to read a book, even though I have to hold the book right up to my eye like this to see the letters and to see the words. Still, there's just something about the magic between that dark mark on paper to an idea in my consciousness that blooms into a scenario and a story and people I know and can wonder about, and it's magic, just magic. So, if you're not a reader, you're missing a lot. TV's great, so's a movie, but there's something goes on between those squiggly marks on a sheet of paper, your eyes, and your brain, that the movies and TV just cannot duplicate.